The big waterfall was in place and looking great, but I had concerns around how visible the power-up monitors were behind the water. I thought I may be able to use power functions lights to illuminate the area, so I bought myself a few sets to try out. Frustratingly, 2 of the 4 sets appeared less bright than the others, and I later found they were marked differently, so I wasn't sure how suitable they were for my usage. I began playing with the position and number of lights, aiming to find the optimal visibility. I wanted the monitors to be visible, but I didn't want them to look like a bright light was shining on them. Positioning the lights further away gave a softer, more natural appearance, but I'd need more lights to keep the brightness levels up. 6 lights was pretty overkill. I found that 2 gave a nice balance. To help with positioning the lights to point at the face of the monitor, I removed a layer of the adjacent wall, where I sadly suffered a loss. I kinda wish I'd kept track of all the parts I've broken throughout this project. So 2 lights seemed fine, at least with one monitor, but I wanted 3 or 4, so how would 2 lights manage if tasked with lighting extra monitors? With another 2 monitors installed, I started with 4 lights, mistakenly thinking there were 2, but even so, and as I expected, they didn't provide much light to the furthest monitor. I also felt that 4 lights didn't appear much brighter than 2, later finding that doubling perceptible light requires 4 or 5 times the power. Rather than adding more and more lights at great expense, I figured I'd try adding lights to the opposite side of the waterfall, which was going to be a little trickier due to the mechanism for the spike trap, but there was just enough room for a pair. The camera really doesn't pick up lights as well as the human eye, as there was a more perceptible difference to me. Not great, but it was good enough. I have had a good experience with using third-party lights in a previous Lego MOC, so I did grab what I had available to do a comparison, but found I only had one orange LED, which really wasn't any use. I later removed a couple of white LEDs from my other MOC, but found they weren't any more powerful than the Lego lights. After wrapping up this stream, I did some thinking, wondering whether I could discreetly light the monitors from below. I'd created cutouts in the grass, then pushed the monitors back and the waterfall slightly forward to give more space to fix lights in. I'd been physically testing the arrangement with the lights connected to a lift arm, but I thought using connectors might allow more flexibility when connecting to the framework. Studio doesn't currently have models for the lights, so I had to represent them with Technic pins. I wanted a slight angle on the lights to point at the screens, so I'd originally planned on using ball joints, but I soon felt like this would need more effort than I wanted, and that maybe simple angled connectors would be better. Unfortunately, it turned out that even the widest angled connector wasn't wide enough an angle, so I had to change to a system I could manually set. At first I went for connectors with pinholes, so I could use pins with friction to set the angle, but the lights were offset between connection points and it was going to be hard work connecting offset connectors to the framework. Instead, I switched to connectors I could run a single axle through, but without the friction pins I'd need to rely on resting the lights on something to set the angle. I found there wasn't enough space under the connectors for a tile to rest on, but then spotted that I should be able to rest them on plates connected to the back of the facade. Once everything was in place, it worked pretty well, but I thought I could probably get away with raising the lights up for a little extra illumination. I found another broken part here, but I suspect it may have been broken before its involvement in the project. With everything back in place, I could get my first look at how the lights would look through the waterfall. While the monitors were certainly visible now, the background was also going to need lighting to be seen. A lot more lighting. I only had the 2 dimmer sets of lights available now, which weren't having much impact pointed directly at the background, but I wasn't confident they'd even provide enough light for the monitors if I were to swap them. It was here that I discovered the brighter lights were marked differently to the dimmer ones, which I can't find any reference to online. Between live streams I made the swap, finding performance of the dimmer lights to still be good enough, and also experimented with light placement for the background. I'd previously been considering lights down the edges of the waterfall, potentially redesigning the frames to eliminate any shadows which would be cast by them, but I found the best performance came through lighting from above. This was potentially going to be an issue, as there was only the thin waterfall top I could hide lights behind, so I began with fixing 2 lights at the top corner. They did a good job of lighting the one side, but it looked as though I would need more coverage from above. So I was likely going to need to double the depth of the waterfall top to conceal the lights, which was going to be tricky. I started with the simplest approach of adding a Technic brick to hold the light, but this would shine the light straight down, rather than at the wall. Sometimes starting from scratch can help finding new perspectives in solutions. There was a half plate gap between the top plate and the first connection point on the back of the waterfall, so this would really have to be filled with a bracket. Connecting a Technic lift arm to the base of the bracket did then align the arm with the plate above, but there'd be a half plate gap between them, though this could be worked around by lowering the arm one module. The half plate gap I spotted between the bracket and the front of the waterfall, however, could not be worked around, so I had to revert to taller brackets, leaving me less room to work with. I was going to need to use pins to angle the light towards the wall, but my only choices of Technic bricks were a medium blue 1x2 with a pinhole, which would position connectors too high or too low for the lights, or a bright light blue 1x1 with an axle hole, which I'd struggle to fix connectors to at an angle. I thought I might do better designing this physically to better see how the lights would fit in the area. The first thing I realised was that I hadn't been considering the cables, with them not being in studio. I could loosely pass these around the back of the facade wall, but I thought I'd rather do a proper job and pass them through the wall. So I'd need a hole to pass the cables through, but I didn't want the wall to be compromised by leaving a brick out, so I first tried a 1x2x2 panel, as they have both a base and a top to connect to, but I found that they were just a single plate too tall to fit where I wanted. The smaller 1x2 panel wouldn't really be appropriate due to having no top on it to support bricks, so I had a look through what modified bricks might be usable, and which I was likely to have in my inventory. The 1x4 with channel looked like an ideal choice, and one I definitely had available, so I grabbed a couple and soon had them installed in the facade walls. They were perfect for running the cables through, but when fitting the facade section back in place, I realised I'd forgotten to account for the framework and the bricks were too long to fit. There was another brick I'd had in mind for the channel, but one which I didn't think I had available, until I discovered there were a pair in another Sonic set I had. The brick was again perfect for running the cables through, and this time fit correctly against the framework. I'd also devised a simple way of connecting the lights to the waterfall's support bar. It wasn't great, but it was okay for now.